a stern selfie painting. My water atomizer. And randomly smoothing out the water with a big flat brush. Uh-oh, this is going to be hard to pronounce. This is Primatech by Daniel Smith, Hematite Violet, that's better, Genuine. Now remember, this was a random wash on the paper, on the watercolor paper. So in some areas I'm painting wet on dry, and in some areas I'm painting wet on wet. Right now I think it's mostly wet on wet. But as they say, no pain, no gain. By the way, this outline drawing was traced onto my watercolor paper. Now, some people think that's a very bad thing. And how could I call myself an artist when I trace? Well, my answer to that is there's a special place in hell for people to criticize me like that. So just keep that in mind. I have a wee bit of a warped sense of humor. Sorry about that. Not really. The paper's still wet, and I'm still scared. You're seeing me paint in real time. But the next chapter in this demo, I'm going to speed it up just a little bit. I need a soundtrack here with the Flight of the Bumblebee. Paper's still predominantly still wet, still scared, but I am having fun. And more importantly, and you can see with the photographic inset here, I'm very carefully, very scrupulously following the value patterns that I see. This is a selfie that I see in my head here. And of course I love the dramatic lighting. Now here's something scarier. A water spritzer and letting it flow down, but it makes for a great watercolor look. I tell this to everybody when I'm teaching workshops. I mean everybody. My favorite definition of watercolor painting is controlling the flood and limiting the soundtrack of the Flight of the Bumblebee while you're painting. Enough is enough. Like in my reference photo, you know that this, oh, by the way, this is phthalo blue-green shade. And sometimes I mix it a little with that black. I'm not going to try to pronounce that name again. But anyway, you can see that background is really popping the head, making my selfie very dramatic. Controlling the flood. Well, finally, the damn paper's dry. Now I'm painting wet on dry. And now I'm going in for the even darker values. And I'm starting to bring out the eyes just a little bit. But I don't want it overly rendered because the eye is in shadow and you really can't see all the detail. And that's the cool thing about this photograph. And I want the painting to have that same effect. In fact, this is so important, I want you to see it in real time, so I'm not speeding up this clip yet. I'll do that later. I am multitasking really hard as I paint. I always do. So I'm looking at my painting and I'm comparing it to the photograph. Looking at my painting, comparing it to the photograph. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That is very, very important. At least it is for me. The best way I like to render eyeglass frames is with a semi-dry brush and quickly. It gives those eyeglass frames a lot of energy. It's a good way to do it. And now it's time to speed up my demo a little bit. Hey, don't panic. No Flight of the Bumblebee soundtrack behind this. It won't come back again. Excuse me if I'm repeating myself, but this is really important. Artists, representational artists, whether you're painting a landscape, a still life, a figure, a portrait, you're not painting things. You don't have to name them like, oh, I'm painting a portrait. I'm painting the eyes. I'm painting the nose. I'm painting a landscape. I'm painting trees. I'm painting the ocean. I'm painting rocks or still life. I'm painting a cup of coffee with a spoon sticking out of it. That's all irrelevant. What you're painting are value shapes. And some of those value shapes have hard edges, some have soft edges, some have lost edges. When artists get together, they talk about that a lot. So that's what I'm doing here. And again, my head's on a swivel. I paint, I look at my painting, then my head turns, I compare what I painted to my reference photograph, back and forth, back and forth. So this is very important. You're painting value shapes. And then when you get into colors, you're painting hue being color, hue shapes. So that's the end of my diatribe. But you know what? It is important. Okay, getting more of that. Let me see if I can pronounce it. Hematite, not violent, but violet, genuine, black paint on my brush to work on the beard. And with the beard, I don't have to do lots of little tiny hairs, just enough shapes, just enough value shapes to give the illusion of hair. And people will look at my portrait and say, oh, look how he did that beard. And they won't realize, unless they're artists, that I didn't have to do every single hair that I saw in the photograph. That's the way I like to paint. Now, as I'm painting all these value shape details, I'm not trying to copy exactly what I see in the photograph. The shapes do not have to be exact. I'm fairly loose. The values are correct. The shapes are kind of in the right spot. It's all going to work. You can see how it's coming together. But you don't want to get into the habit of mimicking your reference photograph. Okie doke. Now you can see here I'm working with white chalk markers. By the way, these chalk markers have, they call it liquid ink, but it's not really. It's a gouache-like substance. In fact, for all I know, it may be gouache. And gouache is watercolor. The only difference between gouache and watercolor is gouache is a lot more non-transparent. And of course, watercolor is quite a bit transparent. And I like to use the chalk marker just because of the convenience. I don't have to put squeeze gouache out of a paint tube and put it on my palette. I've got the markers ready to go. And I use markers that have fine tips, markers that have broader tips. I've got those here. You can see I've got 3 types of markers with 3 types of tips. And basically I'm rendering all the hot highlights. That was my Audubon clock again. And it has bird songs on every hour, a different bird song. At some point, maybe when I'm recording these demos, I'll take the clock and just toss it out the window. By the way, my studio's on a 2nd floor. Maybe there should be a trampoline below. Now, most of the highlights on the left side of the face is the white of the paper. But I did need to use the chalk marker where maybe accidentally I put a little bit of gray. And I definitely needed to use the chalk markers to indicate little fine hairs that are coming out on the periphery of my beard and what little hair I have on top of my bald head. The final touch-ups. Okay, I lied. 1 or 2 more touch-ups. Then I'm done. Okay, 4 or 5 touch-ups. Maybe 6. Done. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe.